for our featured review, we are reviewing a movie that has been widely loved by critics. It's played a festival or two already. It is slowly getting rolled out across the country. It is the film Past Lives. And for this, Zach, you're going to go first and tell us what it's about and what you thought.
All right, well, Past Lives is the movie that was the big hit of the Sundance Film Festival. It's directed by first-time writer-director Celine Song, who based it loosely on her own life. In real life, in her life, she had a childhood sweetheart from Asia who she reconnected with later in life at a time when she was already married to someone else. Now, I learned the other day, Celine Song's husband in real life is the screenwriter for the upcoming Zendaya threesome tennis movie. I did not realize that, but that's really
interesting. I think I did hear that, yeah.
Anyway, well, and then I guess I just kind of gave away the plot. The movie stars Greta Lee as Nora, who grew up in Korea, and when she was in Korea, her name was Na Young, and at an early age, she had I wouldn't even call it a romance, but a first love, puppy love, with a boy named Hae Sung, who in the movie is played by Teo Yoo. And they only had a few kind of flings here and there. She was put her head on his shoulder, and they had a kind of mini date at the park. But they were separated because Na Young's family moved to Toronto and eventually New York City, and Na Young became Nora. And years later, they connected over Skype and Facebook, and it was fun to kind of see those already antiquated, obsolete technologies depicted in this movie circa 2010 or so. Maybe they went to see City Island. I don't know. Not together, because Hae Sung was still in Korea at the time, and Nora was in New York. And then the movie flashes forward even from there, and we'll now learn that Nora is married to Arthur, who's played in the movie by John Magaro. If you've seen First Cow, he is Cookie in that movie. That is where I recognized him from. Great movie. And kind of out of the blue, her and Hae Sung reconnect. And at this point, it's been 24 years since they first met. And Hae Sung says that he is coming to New York to see her after all these years. And so the movie kind of depicts those few days in their lives when this potentially awkward love triangle occurs. You could say that Nora's relationship with Arthur is a good relationship. They're both writers. They live on the East Side in a very cramped apartment, but it might not be the world's greatest relationship. And as I think a lot of us can relate to in real life, there are questions about what if. What if Nora and Hae Sung had been together? What if she hadn't left Korea? What if they had been able to meet each other at some point in the Skype era? If she had flown back to Korea or if he had flown out to New York City? They just don't know. And so especially the second half of the movie kind of depicts this visit that he has over a few days, in which they kind of discuss about the what ifs, but more often a lot remains unspoken. Maybe because they lack the courage and conviction to say the things that they're really thinking. Maybe it's because they both know that their fates are sort of sealed. At this point, they're in relationships. Nora is married and has been married for a long time to this guy who ostensibly is a pretty stable and loving husband. The movie is really mature in the way that it depicts this tricky situation. Watching it, I never really felt as though it was a situation where like they were going to, I don't know, run off together. It just didn't seem like a real possibility. The movie is, I think, more interested in questions about fate and decisions and nostalgia than it is romance. That's not to say the movie isn't romantic. I read a critic somewhere who said the movie is like a perfect blend of romance and pragmatism, and I sort of agree with that assessment. The performances in this movie are absolutely remarkable. Greta Lee has to kind of balance. Well, first of all, both Greta Lee and Teo Yoo aged 12 years over the course of this movie, and I think they both do it convincingly. They're people whose lives change immensely over the course of that time, but because the movie is such a truncated view, we only kind of get glimmers of how their lives change. There's a kind of ongoing joke about the award that Nora wants to attain. It begins as a Nobel Prize, becomes a Pulitzer, and ends as a Tony. I think that sort of indicates the trajectory of her life. The movie is obviously reminiscent of a lot of great movies, particularly the Before series, the Richard Linklater movies. I thought of The Bridges of Madison County, In the Mood for Love, Blue Valentine, Goodbye First Love. There's a lot that come to mind over these movies that cover long periods of time between people who obviously share deep emotional and even romantic connections, but because of fate and circumstance are unable to spend their lives together. And I think those are oftentimes the best kind of movies. Those are movies that, for me, really touch on things that I emotionally connect with. This movie is flawless. It was stunningly shot in 35 millimeter by Shabir Kirshner, who did the Small Axe films. Even in the first 10 minutes, you kind of know that you're watching something that has a grasp on story and character. It's a movie that, again, where the kind of like in some of the best movies of the last few years, a lot of the story is contained within moments of silence. The complexity is in the emotions, not the dialogue. And I think the movie is trying to say a lot of deep things about loneliness, about connection, about marriage, about relationships. There's a really great line in the movie where a character says, "You make my world so much bigger, and I'm afraid I don't do the same for you." I think that's a line that all three of the characters could probably say to each other over the course of the movie. For me, this is an easy 4-star movie. I think this should be a serious front runner at this point for Best Picture, considering that it is an A24 movie that came out in the first half of the year, like last year's Best Picture winner, which it's considerably better than. And it, I think, announces the arrival of a serious filmmaking talent in Celine Song. I, along with seemingly everybody else, loved this movie.
All right. 4 stars from Zach. Todd, where are you at on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I like this movie a lot too. I agree that it's shot gorgeously. Like, and there's a lot of like stuff going on. There's a lot of longing, a lot of broken hearts, a lot of repressed feelings, and it's heightened by the simplicity, but the elegance of the cinematography. I mean, it's hard to mess up like New York and stuff like that, but it reminds me of other classic romances that are set there. But I really like the opening scene, which is like was the present day, and the three of them are just sitting there in a bar, but it's being commented on by strangers. And my first thought was like, I feel like that could easily be Jesse and Celine commenting on those characters. And I mean, they clearly is inspired a lot by the Before movies, but the one issue I had was that it kind of kills the momentum and goes back. Like I would have rather the backstory like of the characters been looked at organically and not like through flashback immediately, like through conversation. Like there's a lot of times where they're just like talking in a bar or like walking around when we could have eventually gotten those scenes. Like I didn't really care about the scenes of them as children. And plus like Hey Sung is kind of boring though. Like I mean the actor isn't very good. I don't think he really relates to any other character. But Greta Lee is absolutely fantastic. Like she's able to portray every emotion with subtlety and believability. Like she's realistic, she's relatable, and kind of hypnotic to watch, even though she doesn't do a whole lot. Like she doesn't overplay anything. It kind of reminded me of The Worst Person in the World in a way, where like she's this really relatable character. You can question a lot of her decisions, but you're always like right there with her because of how she plays it and how like you're on the same page. It's just a simple movie, and it's really sweet. It's really pure, and it makes you reflect on things and on decisions, but it doesn't exactly challenge you with them. It just like lets them sit there. And the closest relative to me of this movie is Blue Jay, which is a movie that was in my top 10 of like 2016, which is another similar really talky movie, but it's about two former acquaintances who have been out of touch for decades, and they reconnect and sort of like deal with like what they were dealing with when they met when they were teenagers. The characters are not cliche at all. Like Greta Lee is alluring. Magaro is interesting to watch. I think the movie's funny because it pokes fun at a lot of these types of movies, which is a little cringe, but it also plays it off really well. They're like, he's like, oh yeah, I'm the white American villain who's going to ruin this relationship or something, but which was kind of a weird line, but it worked really well in that situation because of when it was, and how he said it. And the ending had a poignancy that I didn't really think wasn't really expecting. It sneaks up on you, and it'll linger in your mind afterwards. I guess the same way a dormant past life would as well. I'm giving it a high 3.5 stars, and I don't know that it's actually going to be a huge Oscar movie. It seems like Mass or or After Sun or First Cow, like these like really big critical movies that are eventually going to underwhelm in nominations, but it's going to be remembered by basically every critic group out there.
Yeah, echoing everything you guys have said, I'm giving this one 4 stars. It is a remarkable film. My favorite parts of this movie are the moments where no one is talking. Because there are several moments in this movie where there are just characters staring at each other. And it is some of the most beautiful moments like you can find in a film. It's just so amazing. Um, Everything you guys said, I'm right there with you guys. Um, the way that I'll disagree a little with Todd in them going back and kind of backfilling everything. It just kind of builds that relationship throughout, so that all the tension is built up for that moment where they finally get to meet again. Which apparently I saw Celine Song kept the 2 actors from meeting until they shot that scene. So that scene where the 2 characters meet for the first time after 24 years at this point is actually the first time that they meet, which is just cool. I don't know. It's an amazing movie, and Celine Song just kind of comes out of nowhere. I think I saw she was a staff writer on The Wheels of Time, and then she wrote and directed this. Like that's her trajectory. The other film I was thinking of as I was watching this is I couldn't help but compare it a little bit in how they were like exploring, past lives and what their life could have been like. It reminded me a little bit of the subplot of Michelle Yeoh and Ke Huy Quan and Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like if you just took that subplot of seeing them in all these different moments of how their lives could have gone, like you take that out and tell it as a really stripped down indie film instead of a crazy sci-fi multiverse thing. That's kind of what this ended up at. And I think even for those that loved Everything Everywhere, one of the things they loved about it was how it, through all this chaos, you still had the poignancy of these simple relationships. And this is just taking out all the chaos and just having the simple relationships and focusing on that, because you don't need all the overblown stuff to tell such a personal, amazing story. And so, yeah, Past Lives, 4 stars. It's incredible. And like Todd said too, it lingers. There are parts of it that you will be thinking about for a while.
So
Yeah,
Zach
I think
said that this. Okay, I was just saying, like, this was you said this was the big hit at Sundance. Why didn't it win any awards? Like, it was not, didn't win a single prize at Sundance yet. This is the movie everyone was talking about afterwards. I mean, that's not normally the way that goes. Like,
Yeah,
the audience award went to 1001, I believe.
I don't know the full story behind it, but I do know that the people who were there said that there were 2 standing ovations, which they had said they had never seen before at the Q&A with Celine Song. So I can't speak to that. I do agree with you, Todd, that this does feel kind of like a movie that critics will love, but unfortunately might get overlooked. I hope that doesn't happen. Honestly, I don't really care what the Oscars think of it. But I think this movie took an incredible risk and incredible amount of discipline to make this not a love triangle. Like, it is a love triangle, and obviously there is a great deal of chemistry between Nora and Hae Sung, but that's not really I don't think that's really what Celine Song is interested in. I think what she's interested in is just more about how fleeting life is. And Hae Sung talks a little bit about that at the bar at the end of the movie when he says, could we have had kids? Could I have come to America? I mean, but so much of the movie is kind of what goes on in your own head. And there's a lot of parallels in the movie. There's some beautiful parallels between their first goodbye and their final goodbye. Several critics have talked about the end of the movie. Some critics have said they feel like it goes one shot too long, which I disagree with. I really like the last shot of the movie because I think it shows once again how life is fleeting. And life is always in perpetual movement. Movies are so interesting. I went into this movie knowing that it had a 97 on Rotten Tomatoes or whatever, and that everybody loved it. And what's so wonderful about movies is that You know the movie is good, but you don't know how it's going to be good. And this movie was good in ways that I was not remotely expecting. And it made me think of other movies, and it made those movies good too. I would dare say I think I even liked it better than the Before movies, because I keep thinking about my favorite scene in the Before movies, which is the last scene in Before Sunset. And I think this movie has that scene, but with consequences. Like the movie just kind of ends there, and it's great that it ends there. It's great, it's romantic, it's satisfying, but like that's not real life, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it isn't in the world of that movie. This movie is real life, and we haven't even talked about just the layers in this movie about immigration, for example, about race, about class, about gender. This movie has so much contained in it that it needs to be unpacked, and yet there's so little that's like outwardly spoken about it. It's just remarkable, and I haven't thought about anything but it since I saw it yesterday, I guess. So I'm sure a lot of people will be talking about it in the next few months.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because I think you're right. A big part of this is the culture paradigm that you have here too. At one point, Nora's even talking and saying he's so Korean. And
his views are Korean, she says.
His views are Korean. He talks Korean. I mean, it's just there's so that culture changes things so much as well in there. Yeah, looking at this is a movie that is, it's nostalgic in some ways, but not in a sentimental way. It's contemplative. It's reminiscent. It's reminiscing, and at some time, and at some level, it's mourning. It's mourning the life that could have been, and how every decision shapes the life you have, and takes away a life that could have been, and it forces everyone to stop and think, well, what would life have been if those decisions hadn't been made? And would you change them?
Yeah, and in that way, it's a little bit different from Jesse and Celine, because Jesse and Celine had a relationship. I mean, they spent long hours together. I mean, granted, it was over just a couple days, but these two people never spent more than an hour together. And they had Skype sessions together later in life. But another movie that I kind of thought of was, like, I know Todd was not a huge fan of this movie, but like The End of Atonement. What makes that movie so heartbreaking, one of the great 5-minute performances of all time by Vanessa Redgrave, is exactly what you said, Terry. The fact that they never had what could have been. And the last line of this movie, I don't know if you guys remember the last line of this movie, said by Hae Sung, and I'll spoil it. The line is "See you then," is such a great line because it goes back to the whole idea of Inyeon, which is kind of joked around in the movie a little bit, but taken seriously has a deep level of poignancy to it. Yeah, I don't know. I love this movie. It's fascinating to think about, and Celine Song is a great filmmaker. It's kind of boring. It's boring to talk about movies this good in a way because everybody loves it, and it's not Merlot. I think this movie is Pinot. It's sublime.
Just
and
delightful.
if it wasn't thrice approved, I think we would be talking about people getting fired.
Probably.
Who's gonna say
All
they
right.
didn't like this movie?
I know.
That's a bold statement.
Well, it doesn't have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, so
That is true. I did read one of the negative reviews. It's by Alison Wilmore of Vox, and she said basically that the problem of the movie was, or maybe it was Vulture, she said that the movie wasn't gritty enough. It was a little bit too romantic, but I completely disagree with that. I think the 97% also disagree with that.
All right. So, in a weekend where you can go see Indiana Jones, you can go watch Transformers, you can, what else is out there right now? You can go watch The Flash or whatever, blockbuster chaos is out there. Go find Past Lives. You are not going to regret it.
By the way,
it didn't even crack the top 10, unfortunately, which kind of, it finished in 12th place in 900 theaters, which, I mean, it's a it's a decent amount of theaters for a movie like this, but hopefully it's able to withstand that and get a couple more weeks at least.
So,
Yeah.
one last thought about it. I know a lot of people have asked Celine Song about her life and her inspiration for making this movie. The question that I would want to ask her if she were here, maybe she's listening. Did you guys see the title of Arthur's book? It was called Boner.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's the stick man in the movie. I want to know what was behind the title Boner. And I want to read that book.